However, Anthony Haney, we start on the four-letter network. Da-da-da, da-da-da. ESPN stars say dumb things into microphones, and it's being talked about everywhere, overriding the story of the athletes that they cover who really deserve better. Headline breaking news. I want to talk about this a little bit because I have thoughts, and I think the thoughts that I have, bluntly, towards Pat McAfee and Stephen A. Smith are perfectly encapsulated by their conduct and their words, their outrage, their takes, their whatever has happened, whatever versions, whatever words, descriptors you want to use of the last 24 plus, at this point, hours in the Caitlin Clark, Kennedy Carter incident aftermath saga nonsense discussion. Anthony, dealer's choice here. You want to start with Stephen A. or you want to start with McAfee? Because I don't care. Because I got time for both.
I think we should start with Stephen A.
Okay, we can start with Stephen A. So here's my problem with Stephen A. Smith. And I've talked about Stephen A. actually a little bit over the years because his opinions dominate sports conversation in a way that is, frankly, a problem. But it's not his fault. It is the fault of his bosses at ESPN who have oversaturated him. And also, to the extent that it's his fault, it's his inability to say no to being on more platforms. Bro, you don't need your own show on First Take, your own separate podcast, your own seat on NBA Countdown, and an invitation to invite yourself on every other show on the world's biggest sports network whenever it is that you see fit, and also seemingly open invitations when it fits whatever you want to do on CNN and Fox News and other places. Like, just do your show, man. And occasionally, yeah, stuff's going to blow up and maybe you take an invite to one of those other places. Sure. But you really you got 2 hours on TV every single day and an open invite on every other show on ESPN, and you need your own podcast so that you can talk about other stuff? How much of you do you think we need? But I think when you talk about what happened on First Take yesterday with he and Monica McNutt, you 1000% see the answer through Stephen A.'s eyes, which is you cannot possibly get enough of me because I am the center of the universe. And it wasn't always this way for Stephen A. Smith. Stephen A. was a real journalist, and it's why I find him so irritating in so many ways, because he still portrays himself that way. He does talk to people. He occasionally does actual journalism, even if it is opinion journalism, where he talks to people involved and people talk to him. There's no doubt that dude is plugged in. I will not come here and besmirch Stephen A.'s talent, and I will not besmirch Stephen A.'s work ethic, because that is another thing that I will say that dude puts in a ton of time. An inordinate amount of it is on camera, but I have no doubt that he also does work behind the scenes to prepare and find things out and talk to people and have conversations. But what has happened to him in that show is, especially as it's no longer Skip and Stephen A. or even Stephen A. and Max, that it is truly Stephen A.'s show. He went from kind of an equal in Skip, someone who actually has worse takes and worse opinions, and I think a lot of the stuff I just said about Stephen A. isn't true about Skip Bayless, to be blunt. But like, they were equal stakeholders in that show. Right? So you go from that to Max Kellerman, who's clearly the second fiddle on that show, as Stephen A. just grew bigger and bigger. And then you go to just Stephen A. is the only constant on that show, with Molly, who's just a moderator, and then a rotating cast of characters around Stephen A. And so what's happened is Stephen A. has seen that, seemingly, and said, what matters is me. What matters is my opinions. And what I mean by that is he seems to think that what he does and what he says matters more than the actual news itself. If something happens, that thing is merely an avenue for Stephen A. to chime in on it, and then the story is not what happened and other people's potential opinions or whatever significance is self-evident in that news. It is literally Stephen A.'s thoughts. So how often does this happen where we get ESPN alerts and it's like, news alert, Stephen A. says this? I got news for ESPN and news for anybody else who thinks that. What Stephen A. thinks is not news. That shouldn't be categorized that way. It's very silly. It's stupid, in fact, because it is impossible for him to be the expert on every single subject, which is why I think we get to the point yesterday is he seems empowered to think that that is who he is and what his role is in sports media, that he is the king, that not just the biggest voice, because I actually do think he has that. Whether you listen to it or not is a different story. I particularly don't, but hundreds of thousands, actually, frankly, millions of people do. Good for him. What a gig. That's why he makes a ton of money. But for him, in a moment where he's having an argument, discussion, debate, whatever you want to call it, with Monica, and for him to have the audacity, to use one of his favorite words, or it's actually, I don't know whether that's actually, Anthony, one of Stephen A's favorite words, or is that just the word that I associate with him because when Frank Caliendo does his Stephen A impression, that's a word he uses.
I think that's the word he uses.
The audacity.
That's one of them. He has several.
He has several. Anyway, the point is, he has the audacity in that moment to say, who's done more women's basketball for women's basketball than me? Do you realize how far up your own supply, or how high off your own supply, or how up your own, you got to be Stephen A. Smith, who's been talking about women's basketball for 6 weeks, to be like, nobody's done more for the game than me. Nobody's done more than for First Take. Get all the way the hell out of here, bro. Which is why I'm so happy that Monica was like, respectfully, you could have been doing this 3 years ago. At least. And he's just, oh my, you can't be. Facts, bro. Doesn't feel good when it's coming back at you, huh? Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Congrats, you won. And I know there's other parts of that argument and other parts of that discussion that a lot of people disagree with Monica on and want to nitpick. I honestly didn't listen to the other 30 whatever minutes. That's the thing that kept coming across my timeline, and eventually I had to click on it. And I was like, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. You won the dumb prize, which is highlighting the fact that you haven't done nearly as much as you seem to think, that what your limits of what is possible for women's basketball are so low that you think the past 6 to 8 weeks, if you want to go back to talking about it some last year around the championship game only in Iowa LSU, like, congrats. In the last 2 years, you've spent maybe 7 weeks, and 6 of them in the last 6 talking some about women's basketball. Congratulations. You want a cookie? No. It's ridiculous. And then, and this is where I did not anticipate people getting as mad as they did about, I thought what I was saying was fairly obvious, as mad as they did on Twitter this morning. Remember, Anthony, never tweet. I apparently needed a reminder. But then he goes on his podcast and says, nobody even knew who Monica McNutt was until she came on First Take. Monica McNutt has been leading and a key part of the WNBA coverage on ESPN ABC for many, many years. I remember on 106.7 The Fan having Monica on before opening weekend of the W, like long enough ago, which is at least 2 years, if not 3 or 4, before WNBA opening weekend, because she was on ABC's coverage of it. Which, by the way, ABC network television hosting gig, good freaking gig, big freaking deal. Monica's been known. And that's not to count the work she's done as a sideline reporter for ESPN on their NBA coverage. That's not to count the fact that she is the #1 radio analyst on the New York Knicks radio network. That is not to count the fact that many of you know, being here in D.C., that Monica was a star at Georgetown. A bona fide star, one of the best Georgetown women's basketball players in the history of the program. I know I covered her games when she would play Syracuse, and she put up some numbers against us. Didn't like Monica very much from 2011 and 2012. Because she, damn Hoyas. So at the end of the day, like, to go on another platform, even if he did it on his own platform and be like, I made you to do that about a colleague, to trash a colleague like that, I couldn't do that. couldn't go on, my other podcasts and be like, Chris Russell sucks. I made that dude because he comes on my show sometimes. Like, bug off. I would get called in the principal's office so fast, and I think I'd probably be told, like, hey, we're suspending you. So when I said that I think Stephen A. should be suspended for that, I didn't think that was a controversial opinion. Apparently it is. It's just you don't treat colleagues that way. And so what you have is yet another example of a grown man talking about women's basketball, showing his ass, and coming off as pathetic and weak. And again, I respect Stephen A's talent. Stephen A's ability to have passion and ultimately engender feeling from people when talking about any number of topics is remarkable. It is the gold standard of the industry in many ways. I also do not begrudge the fact that that man has worked incredibly hard to become everything that he has become and the platforms that he has. This is criticism of this incident, but also criticism of what I think he's done with that platform, which is instead of taking the platform and being like, how can I use this to talk about important things? And I'm not talking about like, you must always talk about racial, gender, social issues and inequities. Like, I'm not talking about highbrow important things. Whatever you think is important in that day of sports. He's like, how can I make this about me? That's a lame way to do this job. Not as lame as the way Pat McAfee did it yesterday, though. We'll talk about ESPN's other multi-million-dollar man next on the Hoffman Show. Quickly, a word on Pat McAfee and his day yesterday, where he opened his show with a slideshow that basically he goes, everyone's talking about this rookie class. Nope. There's one white, insert B word here, from Indiana, and for the Indiana team, and she's a superstar. He's apologized. Good. Calling a woman, even I don't think he did it, like, he's not doing that in derogatory. Like, she's been on the show, like, whatever. Basically, it's the dude who got too comfortable, right? It's like, no. And there's this archetype, Ant. The white dude who gets too comfortable and says a word that he's not supposed to, and then everyone's got to be like, we're welcome here, and we're our friend until you said that.
Yeah.
No, sir. You get out of here with that. And that's kind of what happened with Pat McAfee, except for in a room full of dudes talking about women's sports. He's like, I was at the games. I'm sitting front row. Caitlin Clark's on the show. And then he got a little too comfortable. Can't do that. And it was interesting when I tweeted about Stephen A. this morning, some people came after me and were like, why did you say the same thing about McAfee? And I'm like, I'm pretty sure no one has to say it about McAfee. Everyone knows that he really messed up, including him. But I think the other part of this with McAfee is, in order to be way up in arms about Pat McAfee, I'd have to care about what Pat McAfee says in a serious way. And bluntly, I don't. Put it another way, Pat McAfee is a clown. And I don't mean that in a, like, that dude's a clown insulting kind of way. Pat McAfee's a clown in a circus definition sense. Like, when the clowns come out at the circus, they don't deliver real information. They're there for silly jokes and entertainment. And occasionally, Pat McAfee does some really funny stuff. But I don't watch Pat McAfee's show, nor do I care about his opinions on pretty much anything. He occasionally has some interesting interviews where, like, he'll get other people to say interesting things. The fact that he's got Belichick and Peyton Manning and, like, people like that regularly on his show, like, yeah, he gets good stuff out of them. And for that reason, the show is worth consuming, I guess. But I don't give a rat's anything about Pat McAfee's opinion on anything serious. He's a goofball. And you want to know what? The first person to admit all of this before anyone gets in their feelings about what feels like an attack on Pat McAfee would be Pat McAfee. The dude shows up to work every day in the same black tank top. They have a warning that goes before and during their show talking about how not seriously you should take them. And then people get upset because he does things that are upsetting legitimately because he occasionally has to do the real part of this job, which is talk about real stuff. And that's the thing. This is a very silly decision that ESPN made, in my opinion, is giving him this kind of leeway on their network, is to be like, hey, we want to be a serious news network while also we have entertainment and like there's room for fun in sports. I think that's actually been my main point over the last 2 days is like, God, this stuff sucks the fun out of sports in a major way. And it's a real big bummer. And I hope that we can get back to the fun stuff soon. But like with McAfee, like if news breaks, if serious stuff happens or the topics are require a little more care during the hours that he's on the air, he doesn't have the skill set. He doesn't have the tools in the bag to talk about it. It's not his thing. And that's fine when you're on a YouTube show and doing your thing. But when you're on a network and you have hours to fill and like the news could take you in any direction, you got to be prepared to do it. And so to be very, very clear here, because I actually wish I could put what I'm about to say first because it feels like I'm making excuses for McAfee. His behavior and what he did was wildly out of pocket, wholly inappropriate, and totally inexcusable. Like, we're adults. I hope that's self-evident, but it's worth saying, right? You can't call a woman what he called her, and when discussing issues of race, you also are not doing yourself any favor, or the argument any favor, or race relations, or anything, anybody in any way, any favor by being that not tactful. Dear God, man, if you're going to attack the issues of race and gender, could you at least pretend like you're doing it with some kind of intelligence? You're not cool, you're not cutting through anything, you're just making an ass out of yourself. But that's kind of the thing, or my point is, that's what Pat McAfee is he's someone who is the first to say, I'm just a guy who's making an ass out of myself for everyone else's entertainment, and then collecting checks on the back end of it. And so, to me, like, Stephen A. is someone who pretends to be a journalist and went after a colleague. Pat McAfee is a clown who tried to do a serious thing and reminded us all that he's a clown. And again, I don't say clown in a derogatory way. Clown's a real job, and they're a part of the circus, and there's room for clowns in the circus. But you got to know your role. And if all of a sudden, I don't know, Ant, how wild do we want to get with our circus analogies here?
I don't really think we need to go too wild.
I think this one works.
Yeah.
If the clown all of a sudden tried to become the guy who juggles the fire,
yeah, there's
a good chance he's going to set himself ablaze.
Very much so.
And that's what happened yesterday. Pat McAfee was like, hey, I'm the clown, but today I'm going to be the fire guy. And he started tossing, and he got what? He didn't even get, like, toss the first one. On the way to toss the first one, he burned the hell out of his face. And then was like, hey, guys, I set myself on fire. Can someone please put it out? That's the McAfee take. Anything you want to add, Anthony?
The Pat McAfee, I think, was pretty straightforward.
Yeah, that one didn't need a lot of time.
Yeah, I think Stephen A. He tried to clean up, his remarks earlier today on First Take, but it's clear to me that when he went on his own podcast that Monica calling him out, and I'm not gonna say First Take doesn't talk women's sports, but at the same token, with the platform he has, we haven't really, I watch First Take. I'm not going to sit back and say they talk about, women's sports all the time. They've given, Aja Wilson her just due the last couple of years, the dominant run that she and the Aces have had. Yes, it gets mentioned, but what we're doing now, or what we've been doing the last 6 weeks, we've never talked about the WNBA this extensively. They've never, led First Take talking about anything WNBA adjacent. So I think Monica, to an extent, is right in calling him out. Totally. And he just needs to, take it on the chin, to be honest.
I saw Monica this morning on Get Up say this, and I thought it was great, which is, I want to see us get to talking about the basketball, and not just like Caitlin Clark basketball.
Yeah.
She goes, are we talking about whether Nafisa Collier can be the MVP? Are we talking about what Asia's doing and the fact that the Aces are on a great start to the three-peat and Asia's putting up historic numbers? Are we talking about the Connecticut Sun being undefeated? Those are the three storylines that she mentioned. By the way, the Sun facing the Mystics tonight in Connecticut. 8-0 Connecticut versus 0-8 Washington. Yikes, bro. We'll talk about that game later. But, like, why can't First Take lead the show with the discussion of who's your MVP frontrunner? The same nonsense we do in, 5 games into the NBA season, which we got to fill time. It is what it is. There's no problem with it. Like, you do it in November in the NBA. Why can't you do it in June in the W? Who's your WNBA MVP leaderboard right now? Why can't you have that discussion? Because here's the thing. In life, there are thermometers and there are thermostats. Right? Thermostats measure the temperature. Thermometers measure the temperature. Thermostats set it. Realistically, what Monica's telling Stephen A is, you're a thermostat. You have the ability to define what is mainstream. You are big enough. You have enough influence. If Stephen A decided to do that, every other show in America would suddenly have to be looking up Nafisha Collier and Asia Wilson's numbers to have a take. Mainstream media is a mix of both. You need to be a thermostat and set what is the agenda to talk about, but you also need to understand what it is that people want. And so if you can understand enough what people will tap into and then use your platform to say, hey, this is something that matches that maybe you're unaware of, that's how you get good, innovative content and expand the conversation. And again, is that Stephen A's responsibility? No, his responsibility is ultimately to just, like, there's a reason they talk about the Yankees, the Knicks, the Cowboys, whatever, because it's what the most people care about. The numbers don't lie. But then don't claim to be some kind of activist for women's sports otherwise. Don't claim to be a thing that you're not. If you want to be that thing, please, by all means, do it. But you don't get the credit for doing the work that you didn't do. And I think that's why that bothered me so much, because it's so him. It's so him to be in his little bubble and be like, "How? No one's done more than me." Get outside. Turn on another channel. Stop talking into microphones and turn on another channel and watch something. Because that's just not true. It's Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. And when we get back, we'll take your calls, 301-230-0980. We talked on a Vibe Check Tuesday shortly after the NCAA women's season and South Carolina ultimately defeated Iowa, the Iowa-LSU Part 2, that Connecticut game that did 14 million viewers. And we took some calls on, like, how interested will you be in the WNBA season? A lot of y'all called in and was like, I'm in. This is awesome. Well, we're now in June, and we got all this other stuff circling around the actual basketball. Are you still in? 301-230-0980. We take the Vibe next.